All right, welcome back to the PCC podcast. I'm super excited for today because today we have another amazing guest who's a team member here at PCC. And we're going to be talking about something a little bit kind of on the fringes of health and fitness, which is injury management and prevention with our injury management and prevention specialist, Jess Bergin. So welcome and happy to have you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. I think it'll be a good one.
It will. So definitely want to dive into all the nitty-gritty stuff, like, all the things that our clients want to know and just how to really prevent and manage injuries and the common things that we're seeing. So we're going to dive into all of that. But I think it's important that we establish some level of rapport with whoever's going to listen to this. So tell me just about your story with fitness. Like, what has that journey been like for you? Where did it start and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so as a kid, I was always super active and involved in a lot of sports, from a young age through high school and college. But in high school is when I really got into resistance training and the gym. I just wanted to be a better athlete. And then I eventually joined the girls' weightlifting team, and I just fell in love with the weight room and just how good I felt, empowered I felt, and how it translated to my athletic performance. So that's kind of where my love for fitness really started, was late in high school. And then I kind of got interested in bodybuilding there. I just loved the changes I was seeing in my body. I just felt, like I said, very empowered. So I kind of, going into college, I played lacrosse, but I always had this focus in my mind of wanting to compete at some point. So I played sports throughout college. I went on to get my bachelor's degree in athletic training. At the time in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be around sports and fitness. I was injured a lot, so that's kind of how I went that route. I thought, I've worked with so many athletic trainers and physical therapists that, okay, I want to pay it forward and do the same for other athletes and Gen Pop, whoever it might be. So that's kind of why I went that route. And then following getting my bachelor's in athletic training, I went on to work as a college athletic trainer for 4 years, and I got my master's in exercise and nutrition sciences there. And while I was working as an athletic trainer, I really wanted to shift focus to what I had done with my own fitness journey with body recomp and starting to pursue bodybuilding. I really wanted to help people in that avenue. I wasn't so in love with post-surgery rehab, like the initial stages of rehab where you're just kind of like trying to regain motion slowly but surely. I liked the performance side of things and kind of bridging that gap, where people are trying to rehab but then transition back into fitness and everyday life. I just felt like there was such a disconnect there, because it kind of goes PT and then you're off. There's no bridge between, well, how do I get back into like the gym? So that's how I eventually stumbled on PCC. I have been coaching online for 4 or 5 years now, maybe. And I was just really missing that rehab aspect and like the education aspect. And here we are in this role now where I get to kind of merge the two and have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how your story really does just emulate how I feel like a lot of us who make our livelihoods in this industry are always trying to pay forward. Like, here's the transformation that I went through, or here's the changes that I was able to make. I want to be able to help other people do this as well. So as much as it was just like a humor add in where you were like, I was injured a lot, but I think it really does like kind of speak to the fact where it's like, those are the pains you went through and the ones that you understand. So you want to help make it easier for someone. So I definitely want to dive into like just what you said about how like it's PT and then you're off and there's no real bridge there. But first, let's just kind of outline like, what is your role at PCC for those who don't know you or haven't worked with you? What do you do with our clients and how do you help them?
Yeah, so my immediate role is the injury management and prevention specialist. So I kind of work with the coaches on some sides of things, but then also the clients. My role when it comes to helping the coaches is just educating and giving them the tools to kind of troubleshoot with their clients. Say you come to me or your coach and you're like, I'm having this knee pain in a lunge, and they're not really sure of how to modify without maybe making it worse, is what they might be worried about, or what's the best approach. So working with them to help them figure out the necessary questions to ask and kind of diagnose and evaluate with their client to make that game plan for them moving forward. My immediate role with the clients would then be, if maybe they're not seeing progress, or maybe it's something a little bit more severe that the coach would really like for them to have an immediate evaluation, I can hop on a call with a client and do kind of like a virtual evaluation, the best that we can, that's not hands on,
Yeah.
and just kind of get a better history together and talk through things and see how we can troubleshoot and game plan to move forward and try and progress through their plan with their coach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I love how this role integrates with everything, because it really does come down to, a lot of times people view an injury or an ache or pain as a stop sign, when really it's
Yeah.
like a speed bump, and like maybe we need to slow down before we speed up again. And maybe we need to reevaluate exactly what we're doing and how and why. But it takes away the like on and off switch that we often have with a fitness journey of like, well, I started, but then something got in the way. It's like, no, what can we do about it? And so we're really just giving our coaches and our clients the tools to do that. So I love that part of it, is it's making everything more sustainable, which is like our mission at the core. Right. So
Yeah, 100%.
yeah. So tell me about how you want to bridge that gap. So what have you kind of seen just in the like injury recovery industry, like just as a whole, when it comes to, okay, maybe you had something major happen, you had surgery, or you have to go to a physical therapist. And that's what people are really familiar with, right? They're always really familiar with, well, I went to PT and they said I was cleared. But then what happens after that? And where does that create problems?
Yeah, and I think, so I'm doing in-person training now as well at a commercial gym, and I think the biggest thing I've noticed is, like you said, people go to PT, they hit X amount of sessions that insurance technically covers, and they're cleared, and then they're just released to the world to do what they want, but they haven't, say they're a runner and they haven't even ran a mile yet, and they're like, yeah, you can go do your 5K things now, or they came back from an ACL surgery, but they haven't done any true leg strengthening exercises like a barbell squat. So there's like a big disconnect of, how do I now transition to these things that I was once doing before? And I think that's, my biggest goal with in-person training or even online in this role at PCC, is helping kind of bridge that gap, because strength training is such an integral part of what we need to be doing for our rehab. It just seems to stop at a very basic stopping point a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely. So then like what kind of problems come from that? Like, okay, I'm off to the world, and I feel like the thing that most people want to do is they want to jump right back into what they were doing before that maybe got them injured in the first place. So yeah, how does that usually play out? You've worked with a lot of athletes, a lot of people. Like what have you seen?
Yeah, well, I think, it sets you up for a potential re-injury, not always, but when we go from 0 to 100 with no in-between transition, that's where we see some of those acute injuries possibly happen. Or even the chronic things over time, just if our posture is poor when lifting, or just everyday life things, and we're repeatedly doing that over and over again, then we can create more of a long-term chronic problem that's happened because we weren't really adapted to what we were doing yet. So I think it can just potentially set us up for further injury down the line. And not always, that doesn't mean you're going to immediately get injured, but when there's no really like transition to prepare you for those things, it makes it a little harder.
Absolutely. And then like on that note, right? So then someone might say, well, like I went from injured to PT to graduated, and now I'm going to like start a strength training program that should supposedly be good for me, right? And a lot of like people will come off of surgery, maybe have gained some weight, their body composition has changed, and they want to do the whole transformation, right? Gain strength back, gain energy, lose weight. I guess what would like most coaching programs be missing if they don't have this component, like if they don't have the athletic training to like bolster the knowledge and see the blind spots, like what what risks are we going into if we just like start the strength training plan like outright, or we just jump into something brand new like that?
Yeah. Well, outside of potentially re-injuring whatever it is that they're coming back from, future injuries or difficulties with progressing, if they're hitting plateaus, I've noticed a lot of times it's because of underlying movement patterns or imbalances that were never addressed. And I think that's why it's so important to really individualize the training program. You're meeting it to where you're at now, not
Yeah.
where you were at previously. When we go through any type of injury, our body does an amazing job at healing and repairing, but it's never going to be exactly the same as it was before. If you hurt your left knee, it's never going to function the exact same as the right. There's scar tissue, there's different like imbalances and movement patterns that have changed, which is fine because the human body is awesome and we can adapt to that. But we have to now work with our new baseline. And that
Mm.
might mean your starting foundation movements might look a little different than what they were pre injury. So that's just like somewhere new to build off from now.
Yeah, that mental shift is probably really tough for a lot of people of like, and getting away from the narrative that different is bad and that different is always worse. Something like with postpartum women, right? It's like, well, the phrase is once
Mhm.
postpartum, always postpartum, but that doesn't mean that you can't get in the same or better shape than you were before. And so I
Yeah.
think it's getting away from that, right? So yeah, like that mindset shift around, okay, I was injured, I'm better now, but that doesn't mean that we go exactly back to the same stuff. We have to just find I love how you said it, the new baseline.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, it's a mental thing more so than a physical, because when we identify with what the injury or diagnosis or even like an ache or pain that might not be necessarily an injury, we identify with it so much. A lot of times, like our mental state is what's holding us back than anything.
I did that. I did that.
Most athletes do.
I have two herniated discs, so my L4 and L5, and I think I went through a lot of trial error back pain 2018, 2019, 2020, and have really been able to be like more pain free since like 2021-ish. Um, but I think for a lot of it, it was the mentality of, well, I have herniated discs, so I can't load my back with a barbell. I can't do squats or deadlifts. And actually, it was putting myself in a totally new environment, starting CrossFit, that got me out of it because they do it in such little doses that I was like, well, this is okay. Like I'm
Yeah.
going to do 3 sets and that's it. Because in bodybuilding, it's like you're doing 5 sets of 12, and then you're going to go do 3 other compound movements, and then you're done with the workout. So of course I was injured with that amount and the I guess, what's the word? The propensity for injury in those areas. But
Mhm.
that was something that actually started like breaking that belief for me. And it was, my new normal is I'm not broken. I can't not do these things, but dose matters. I think that's the case for a
Yes.
lot of injury situations. Would you say so?
Yeah, 100%. And like I said before, our body is so resilient. It wants to heal. It's going to do what it can to heal itself, but within the right limits. If we're just loading and loading and loading and not giving it a proper rest or constantly like breaking it down, well, yeah, we're going to continue to feel pretty crappy. But that's why a lot of times I tell people, rather than just cutting movement altogether, movement is medicine. We just need to bring the volume back a little bit, work in the ranges that are comfortable and our body can withstand, and we can gradually build on that. But we want to gain that confidence by going through the things that are scary, essentially.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Gain the confidence by going through things that are scary. So like, what do you mean by that?
Like, for example, I tore my ACL and I had to go through my whole rehab of doing ACL. And before tearing my ACL, I was barbell squatting a lot, um, full range of motion. So that torque on my knee, that thought of going through that movement again was terrifying. But if I didn't practice squatting with some sort of load in different ways, whether on my front rack position or in the back, and worked on getting lower and lower to hit 90, and then, okay, I'm going to gradually pass that, I would have just never done it. Like if we don't go through the movements that might be scary, we'll continue to stay away from them, and then we aren't training those tendons and muscles to withstand that load. So we're really never progressing if we just continue to avoid it. Um,
Mm.
and usually the things that have caused us injury at some point are probably the things that we just need to learn how to better perform or load properly so that we don't do it again in the future. So it's scary to think about, well, that's the one thing that might have hurt me or maybe contributed to exacerbating the pain, but I need to learn how to work around it and strengthen it as well so I can perform it better moving forward.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. This is one of my favorite topics because of my history with my lower back and how much mentally I had to go through as well as physically to what I would consider fully recover. How much of injury recovery would you say is physical versus mental if you had to put like percentages on it, and why?
Oh gosh, that's tough. That is tough because I think there's so much that stems from physical outside of just the exact injury or location. Because I think when we look at where the injury is, say your back, for example, a lot of times we just fixate on the back, but we don't look at everything else in the chain. Like our whole body is a chain and it starts from the base, truly. We have so many layers of muscles in our feet. A lot of times when we're disconnected there, it's going to move up the chain to the knee or up to the hip. So I will say a good majority is physical, but the mental side plays a massive role because if we tell ourselves we can't, then we're right. Whether we can or we can't, we're right either way, right? So if we're
Mhm.
already checked out or anticipating re-injury, anticipating something's going to hurt, pain is a subjective feeling, and a lot of that stems from like how we think and view of pain. So it all stems from like what we're thinking right off the bat, which is an odd concept, right?
Yeah, definitely. And like facing those fears and discomforts when you're getting back into those movements and doing just enough to where it's challenging and proving to yourself that you're more capable than you thought, but not so much that you are really like exacerbating the chance of re-injury or like taking it too far. Um, it's a delicate balance. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember specifically, I used to have these back spasms, and it would like my whole lower back would just like seize up when I was having issues. And it was like, well, I felt like I had to just like sit on a heating pad and just like wait it out, right? But what I found was that there were certain things that I could do to kind of like show my body that it was okay, and like detrain the like fear response, because your body's just trying to protect itself, right? So it's not
Yeah,
always just about like rest recovery. I think very important part of the process, and you need to make sure you do it. But once it's like, okay, you have some green lights, you should go ahead, not being afraid to see how you can prove to yourself and your body like that you are capable, because that's what it's about, right? We wouldn't have this role,
mhm.
we wouldn't be able to overcome injuries as human beings if it didn't mean something, if it wasn't an important part of the journey for our mental resilience as well as physical.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, when we're in this fight or flight, essentially, like it's a major stressor on our body, on ourselves mentally. Our body's going to do things to protect itself. And we carry and present with stress in so many ways. And having an injury and trying to essentially like save that and not re-hurt ourselves further is that's one of the ways that I feel like we're trying to protect ourselves. The muscle spasms and guarding and the hindrance when it comes to doing the things that might have bothered you before, just kind of as a defense mechanism.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, how would you say like people can learn to distinguish that? Like, is it just like trial and error and figuring it out? Because I feel like if we were to tell somebody like, well, it's all in your head, just go do the thing, like that's not productive either.
No.
Right. And so how do you distinguish between, my body has this fear response and I'm able to do the thing, but I haven't been able to let myself yet, versus like I'm
Yeah.
truly not ready and I'm still hurt.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important, just like we were saying, getting back to training, like meeting where you're at. If you know you want to do the 16-inch box jump or whatever, but you haven't even done the 8, okay, well, let's start there. You have to like build that confidence in small levels and increments to kind of believe in yourself in a sense. So
Mhm.
if you take off a bite that's bigger than you can chew or you're not ready for, it's going to be really overwhelming. So I think just starting small and working at your pace, and also just really getting in tune with your body, just like we do with hunger cues, right? Like stopping and being aware of how we feel when we're eating and chewing and when we're satiated. The same thing with listening to our body. Like, how does this movement feel on my knee? Am I in pain, or am I just aware that this is the knee I hurt? Okay, maybe it's a little uncomfortable because I haven't done it yet. I'll do like 5 reps, break. Let's see how I feel. Small chunks, and just trying to become more aware with like how your body feels when you're moving, I think can bring a lot of peace of mind and help in that confidence building process.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what I'm kind of really hearing is those parallels between like our nutrition habits and our training and recovering from injury. It's like really just developing awareness with yourself and assessing from where you are, taking those baby steps. And I honestly think that, if you're somebody who's a client of ours, or maybe you are injured and you're like, there's no way I could continue working on my fitness journey right now, or there's no way that I could start a program like this with, the injury that I have. I honestly think that like going through something like this with someone with your guidance, right, could be so valuable to learning how to tune in for future situations, like same injury or not. It's like to have that iterative process down and understand how to like bring something back in to a full intensity is so valuable.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes it's just getting that outside reassurance of, yes, you can do this and you're not going to make it worse. Because I think a lot of the times that's where our head goes, and it's like all or nothing. Training is off the table, like starting a program is off the table because I can't. But let's focus on what we can do and how we can build up around it. Like we always talk about, there's never a perfect time, right? There's always going to be something, but we can always work around the circumstances that we're in to improve it, whether it's an injury or outlook on food or whatever it might be.
Totally. Absolutely. And just focusing on that internal locus of control, like we've talked a lot
Yes.
about. I love it. Awesome. Well, I want to pivot here and just kind of talk about the specific people that we work with, right? So we work with primarily, for the most part, like the millennial work from home career woman who is hyper focused on excelling and exceeding in her career and honestly everything that she does. So she tends to go hard in the paint. Um, but when it comes to the work from home lifestyle, this is a big shift that happened a few years ago when everything shut down, everyone stayed home, and a lot of people stayed that way. What are a lot of the common issues that we're seeing come up now through the prolonged work from home lifestyle in terms of aches and pains and injuries?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what at least I have seen since joining this team and focusing more on like kind of the work from home is low back, shoulders. Um, just sitting, like the posture that we're in all day long. Before we like drove to work, we'd walk into the building, maybe you'd like get up to walk to the bathroom, you'd leave for a lunch break, whatever it might be. Now, for a lot of people, we're sitting in the same position all day long with minimal movement. I mean, I've heard of people like rolling out of bed and just jumping straight to the computer. Like, there's not much movement going on. And sometimes when we're working from home, like it might just be on the couch with the laptop. So our physical posture throughout the day is putting us at risk for just these overuse, chronic aches, pains, and things like that, just because of the position that we're in a lot.
Absolutely. So, definitely I like straightened up as you were talking. I was like, let me just fix my
As I'm sitting
posture
here,
as I'm lit, like
we all
hunched
do it.
over the mic. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely tough. And kind of the way that I heard it a couple times that really hit home for me with the low back pain that I was having. And this was before I was like really running the business and like sitting a lot, was like when you're sitting, you know, your hips are at a 90-degree angle or so when you're sitting, and that's stretching out your hamstrings and your glutes the way you're sitting, and like putting a stretch factor kind of on that posterior chain on the backside. So then if I were to go from sitting all day to kind of just like, oh, and the hip flexors are compressed, right? So like the front of the hips, the top of the quads are just compressed down in the shortened position. So for me to go and do a bunch of back squats where I'm again in that sitting position where those muscles are stretched, but now under, you know, 100 something, 200 pounds, it's like, okay, now we're adding a ton of stress to that. Or if I were to like go from that to like freaking sprinting or like a 10-mile run, it's like my hip flexors have been like crunched up all day. Like, how are they going to just, they're not just going to magically expand, right? They're not made of Play-Doh. So, so that's what I really thought of. And like back when I did more of like a traditional bodybuilding thing, it was like all of my cardio was incline walk on the treadmill, where it's like your feet are at an angle and then your body's, you're like basically standing while sitting because you're hunched over, like walking up this hill. So
Right.
everything that we were doing is in this one position. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I feel like that the low back, hips would be really impacted by that.
Yeah.
But shoulders, tell me a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, well, we we carry a lot of stress in our neck and our traps to begin with. We carry a lot of tension when we get stressed, like we're uptight, we clench our jaw. There's just a lot of tension already. Now we're sitting all day essentially, and like you said, as we sit here, we just kind of start to slouch. So we're in this rounded posture, just like you're talking about. The hips are shortened and tight. The same thing with our shoulders. We start to round. We're getting the stretch here. Usually we don't have our monitor like eye level with us. We're kind of looking down, so we're putting more stretch on our
Mm,
neck. So we just start to see a lot of issues up in the chest, shoulder, neck area as well, just because of the posture that we're sitting in all day.
mm,
You know, ideally, if we could raise up our laptop screen, because a lot of people are on laptops or monitors, so that it's eye level. Your forearms, you're not like kind of flexed here, but level with the desk so that you're typing in like a neutral position rather than up like this. Um, just being in a more ergonomic position is going to help relieve some of that stress, but it carries over to when we go and try and resistance train or pick up the kids or do yard work at the house. Suddenly we try and open up or lift or do things, and it's like, why is this tight? Why does this hurt? Why am I stuck in this position? So it affects us just like our back and our hips in everyday life.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I forgot even about the like the neck looking down thing because I have like a 2-level desk. So I've got like keyboard down at the bottom. There's a little
Yeah.
like probably 4 or 5 inches of an elevation, maybe 6. And then I have like a laptop stand. So everything's up,
Yeah.
which is so
Yeah.
important. But I even forgot that that was like why I did it. Like it's just it's the way it is now. But like I'm staring eye level all the time when I didn't realize like most people are like looking down, hunched over,
Down.
shoulders
And
running
with
forward.
phones too. I mean, we
Yeah.
live on our phones these days and we're constantly down. I mean, I had a coworker who was like losing the curvature in his spine of his neck
Mhm,
because of how much downward flexion just constantly.
mhm.
I have a client, you know, in person recently. She's all this neck pain just on one side, but she's got two monitors and then her laptop down here. So all
Oh,
day she's doing this while typing. I'm like, girl, we gotta get that thing up and in
ouch.
front, because you're just, you know, constant strain over time is going to translate into these aches, pains, limitations, whatever it is. So our positioning that we sit in for up to 8 hours a day makes a massive difference.
Absolutely. And you think about the percentage of how much of our life that is, and then you're like, well, no
Yeah.
wonder. Do you like dark humor?
I dabble, I guess. I guess it depends how dark we're talking.
I don't know. It's not that dark, but I said this once and I was like, this would be a good joke for this time. Like I joked one time, I said, how many generations do you think it would take for like our babies to come out of the womb with like a hunch because of like what we're doing right now?
Oh, yes. accurate. Seriously. I
Oh, I
mean, they're lucky
know.
they come out with this great posture. I mean, have you seen a baby get into a squat? They know what they're doing. Their toes are splayed. They're functioning, and we ruin them.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully they just all continue coming out malleable and we can work on the posture thing.
Yeah.
But so for the work from home situation specifically, what would you recommend just like ergonomically would be some practical swaps that these people can make that would drastically improve their posture or their aches, their pains?
Yeah. Well, like you said, if you're using a laptop or even if your monitor is low, like having a monitor riser, something that's going to bring your screen up to eye level so you don't have to strain your neck to look down. A supportive chair, not just like a couch or the floor or like a beanbag chair, something that's going to support our hips and our low back if we're seated for long periods of time. And then having, like, if you're raising your laptop, uh, like a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, something separate. So you're not now reaching up to the laptop, but you have it down at desk level, just to keep that stress off your wrists and shoulders, your neck's taken care of with your laptop, and then your hips, low back with your chair would be the biggest things. But honestly, even breaking up the day with some movement. I talk to a
Yeah.
lot of people that work from home, and I'm like, do you take even like a 10-minute break to just like stretch, walk, do
Do
some
you
like
go
neck circles,
outside
anything? And
at all?
yeah, ever. A lot of times people are like, no, I sat all day, I got 2,000 steps. And I'm like, even just breaking up the day with some light movement to get your joints going through active range of motion can help relieve a lot of that tension.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so just like little things. I think my laptop stand was $25. My keyboard and
Hmm.
mouse were like 15 on Amazon, and they're great. And I love the clicky sounds they make. I'm not a gamer, but I like love when it makes a good sound. Um, and second monitor can be good for like, I feel like just the eye strain of like looking at a tiny screen, but
Yeah.
and then the sit to stand desk is a big one. Now, are there any problems
Yes.
that you feel like come from, let's say you get the standing desk where you don't necessarily have the treadmill, but someone were to stand all day? I feel like there's also strain that comes from that. Like when I stand for a long
Mm.
time, my low back starts to hurt a little bit. Or maybe I have issues that I should work on if that's the case. But are there problems that come from standing all day too? Would you recommend that? Would you recommend sitting and standing, like alternating? How would you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would say standing and sitting, like alternating, breaking up both. Not that I've necessarily had anyone that's just had a standing desk and is just standing working all day. I think compensation patterns can come from that as well because we stand, we start to get tired, we put a little bit more weight on one hip, or we kind of relax our
Yeah.
core, we arch our low back. So now our low back is carrying the weight rather than like our core and our glutes. So
Mm.
it comes back to being mindful with it in any posture that we're in. But I think going from an alternating walk or sit or stand, if someone can afford to do that, just kind of helps break up the movement or add in movement in any position.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice there. Now, in terms of the muscles and either strengthening or stretching patterns that you'd recommend. So be mindful that most people will listen to this audio only. So do your best to describe if you can. But what are the best like areas to focus on for those aches and pains to either stretch or strengthen?
Yeah. So, when we do any stretching, obviously I like stretching to say break up the day, get up and just get some movement in. But it is a short term relaxation of the muscle. It's not permanently lengthening it. I always encourage anyone really that's like work from home or in a seated posture a lot, working on like glute strength, core strength, and back strength. Because typically our hips are really tight and our glutes are lengthened. So we want to strengthen our glutes when they're, elongated like that. We're typically not engaging our core when we're sitting in our chair all day. And that's going to play a big role in our back pain as well. Not saying that's the only driver of that, but our glutes and our core will play a big role in those factors. And then when we're sitting a lot, we start to round our shoulders. So our pecs and our shoulders get really tight. So a lot of times we see weakness in the back. So working on strengthening the back, whether it's, rows, if you've got banded rows, if you can do body weight with just things that you have around the house, just working on strengthening the back, as well as the glutes, step ups and hip bridges and things where we're just targeting glutes to work on strengthening those things.
Yeah, totally. And just really like what I'm hearing from that is the kind of opposite of whichever way we're typically like leaning. So if we're constantly rounding the
Mm-hmm.
shoulders forward, like thinking about what the back muscles are doing when we strengthen them, we're doing pull downs and rows with like our chest out, where shoulders are back. We're really strengthening that shortened position because we spend so much time in the lengthened position. So just really being able to counteract that. And because when it's stronger, we'll be able to hold ourselves in that position better because those muscles have the ability to, and they're not just constantly
Yeah.
stretched. I think a lot of times people rely on stretching as a solution for pain. They think, well, if this hurts, I'm just going to stretch it and it'll be better. And we overlook the strengthening portion, how important that is for just like maintaining a baseline, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, you nailed that. A lot of times we hyper focus on, well, my hips are tight, my hips are short, so I just have to stretch my hip flexors. But we're totally neglecting how weak our glutes are from being in this position, right? So strengthening those as well is going to help to counteract that. Same with our
Yeah.
chest and our shoulders.
Yeah. That was the biggest like aha moment for me, was realizing like your glutes don't need more stretching when your back hurts, like your lower back or even your hips and your glutes. It's your hip flexors, the opposite, the front need to be stretched a little bit. And then the back needs to be strengthened so that they contract. And a lot of times, like with hamstrings, I have like kind of a little naggy, like sometimes my left hamstring will get a little aggravated and I have to like resist the temptation to just like only stretch it because it doesn't actually help the situation. It hurts because it's strained outward, right? It's stretched too much to the point where it's strained. So is stretching it more going to help, or is that just like a temporary feel good band-aid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times it is like, and it can feel good to stretch, to relax, but we do want to strengthen. And a lot of times I see that where we're feeling those aches, pains, discomfort, it's probably an imbalance with like a weakness and a strength where we need to bring that up strength wise.
Definitely. Absolutely. No, that's really good stuff. So we'll kind of wrap this up here, but I'm curious, we've touched on a lot of really good nuggets about the headspace around injury, mindset, physical, mental, as well as just some practical advice for the work from home population. But I mean, is there anything else that you feel like are just reminders or common myths or misconceptions about dealing with injuries and pain that the audience should know before we wrap up?
Mm, I think the biggest thing for me, like we kind of touched on earlier, is trying not to identify with a pain or a diagnosis, especially, a lot of times we get in the habit of a diagnosis that we heard like 5, 6 years ago, and we're like dead set on it. And that can be what limits us in so much of what we're doing in daily life, in the gym, at home workouts, whatever it is. So, not to be so emotionally attached to what that former diagnosis or even an ache might be. Um, and then also, not every ache and pain necessarily means injury. I think that's the biggest one I drive home to a lot of my in person clients. Our body just sends us signals, it communicates with us. Sometimes we feel things, and it's not necessarily bad. It doesn't mean that anything is torn, strained, broken. Um, it's just feedback. Maybe we just need to adjust the posture, or maybe our shoe wears a little different today and our body doesn't like it. Um, so every little ache or pain doesn't necessarily mean sound the alarms, red flags. So just being more
Mm.
aware of your body is really the biggest thing.
I love both of those things. Definitely let that first one hold me back for a while. I have herniated
Yeah.
discs. So, and I heard the statistic recently that like over 70% of volleyball athletes, collegiate volleyball athletes have herniated discs, but only like 10% of them present with symptoms or like have gotten an
Mhm.
MRI to go see, or it's like you could have that and not even know. And like you could have
Yeah.
no symptoms. So what does it really mean And a lot of times if we ascribe meaning to it, it's doing us more harm than good. So great takeaway. Great
Yeah,
takeaway.
definitely.
Awesome. Well, where can the people find you, connect with you, and ask you questions about their own aches and pains?
Definitely. Well, my Instagram is Jess.Bergin. Please feel free to reach out at any point. You can shoot me a message. My PCC email, we'll add it, Jess at PCC, Jess
I think it's
Bergin.
jessbergin.pcc, right?
Yes, yes,
We'll
at
put it in the
gmail
show
dot
notes too.
com. Yeah, put them in the show notes. All the email accounts, I mix them up. Shoot me an email. I have my phone number and my signature. You can shoot me a text. Like I said, you can message me on Instagram. Any questions at all, I'm always all ears. And then if you ever have any questions and want to reach out to your coach to set up a consultation call, we can do that as well too.
Sweet. Awesome. And that last part only applies to our PCC clients. So,
Yes.
but
Sorry.
if you, no, you're good. I love it. I love that shameless plug. But yeah, so this was awesome. And I'm really, really glad we did this. So thanks for making the time. And yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already subscribed to the PCC podcast, make sure to do that so you get notified when our next episode comes out. And we'll see you back here next week.